The room felt suffocating, the silence between them too thick to ignore. Jungkook stood just a few steps away from Taehyung, his heart hammering in his chest. Every breath felt shallow, every movement heavy with the weight of his own decision. He had said he wasn't leaving, but now that he was here, so close to Taehyung, he wasn't sure what that meant. Taehyung didn't speak immediately. His gaze was intense, but there was something different in it now. Something that wasn't quite as cold as before, but still guarded. Taehyung was waiting for something from him. Waiting for him to make the next move. Jungkook opened his mouth, but no words came. He was too afraid to say what he was thinking, to admit that he was still caught in this cycle of longing and pain. That despite everything, he still wanted Taehyung, still needed him in a way he couldn't fully understand. "Why are you doing this?" Taehyung finally asked, his voice quieter than before, almost tentative. Jungkook's chest tightened. Doing what? Taehyung didn't move. This. Being here. With me. After everything, his eyes softened for a brief moment, before the walls went back up. "You don't have to. You know that, right?" Jungkook swallowed, fighting the urge to back down, to retreat. "I don't care about everything else. I care about this. About us." He couldn't stop the words from coming. He had to say it. He had to put everything on the line, even if it meant risking everything he had left. Taehyung's expression flickered. "You still think there's an us?" Jungkook nodded slowly. "I don't know what we're doing, but I know I don't want to let you go. Not again." Taehyung's jaw clenched, and for a moment, Jungkook could see the internal battle playing out in his eyes. Taehyung was always so sure, so confident in everything. But now, it was as if he was unsure about what this was between them, unsure if it was worth pursuing. But the more Jungkook stood there, not backing down, the more Taehyung seemed to hesitate. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Taehyung said quietly, his voice strained. Jungkook took a step closer, his eyes never leaving Taehyung's. "I don't know how to make it easier. I don't know how to stop feeling like this." He could feel the vulnerability in his own words, and it scared him. But it was the truth. He didn't know how to let go of Taehyung, didn't know how to stop wanting him when everything about this felt like a disaster waiting to happen. Taehyung's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a second, it seemed like he was going to say something else. Instead, he just exhaled a shaky breath. "You want me to make it easy, Jungkook? You want me to fix everything?" Jungkook hesitated. "I don't need you to fix anything. I just need you to stay." The words hung in the air between them, raw and exposed. Taehyung's eyes softened again, just slightly, as if he was fighting the urge to let his guard down completely. "I'm not going to make this easy for you," Taehyung said, his voice quieter now. "But, if you really want to stay, if you really want to try, then we'll figure it out. One step at a time." Jungkook's breath caught. Was that hope? Taehyung wasn't pushing him away. He wasn't rejecting him. "Okay," Jungkook whispered, barely able to believe it. Taehyung's gaze softened, just enough for Jungkook to see the vulnerability hidden beneath his cool exterior. He wasn't sure what this meant, or where it would lead. But for the first time in a long while, Jungkook didn't feel so alone in this fight. "Just one step at a time," Taehyung repeated, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "We'll take it slow, Jungkook. But don't think it's going to be easy." Jungkook chuckled, a shaky laugh that escaped him without warning. "I don't need easy. I just need you." For the first time, Taehyung let out a soft laugh too, something genuine that reached his eyes. It was a brief moment, but it was enough to make Jungkook believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. The fragile thread between them was still there. But now, it didn't feel like it was on the verge of breaking. It felt like the beginning of something new. The room was still. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't suffocating like before. Instead, it lingered between them, cautious but not unwelcome. Jungkook wasn't sure what came next. He had taken a step toward Taehyung, toward something uncertain, and now he had to figure out where that led them. Taehyung was watching him, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. Not cold. Not distant. Just waiting. "Are you staying?" Taehyung finally asked. Jungkook's fingers curled at his sides. "Do you want me to?" Taehyung exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "I wouldn't have asked if I didn't." That was all Jungkook needed. He nodded, stepping closer, not enough to crowd Taehyung, but enough that the distance between them didn't feel so impossible anymore. "Okay." Taehyung turned away first, running a hand through his hair. "You can take the bed." Jungkook blinked. "And you?" Taehyung hesitated, then shrugged. "I'll take the couch." Jungkook frowned. "That's stupid. This is your bed." "Yeah, well, I don't think we're at the point where sharing it makes sense, do you?" The words were logical. Reasonable. And yet, Jungkook felt something in his chest tighten. He didn't want Taehyung to sleep on the couch. But he also wasn't sure if he could handle being that close, if he could lie beside him and pretend like his heart wasn't going to war with itself. So he didn't argue. He just nodded. "All right." Taehyung didn't respond. He just moved to grab a pillow, tossing it onto the couch before settling down. He didn't even change his clothes. Jungkook climbed into bed, staring at the ceiling. He could hear Taehyung shifting, trying to get comfortable. The couch creaked slightly. Silence settled again. Minutes passed. Maybe more. Then, "Jungkook." Taehyung's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. Jungkook turned his head slightly, looking toward the couch. "Yeah, poor nothing." "Good night." Jungkook swallowed. "Good night, Taehyung." Neither of them slept easily that night. Because the space between them, small as it was, felt impossibly wide. Jungkook wasn't sure when he drifted off. The weight of exhaustion had eventually won over his racing thoughts, pulling him into restless sleep. But something stirred him awake. A sound. A shift in the quiet. He blinked, adjusting to the dim room, his eyes landing on the couch first. It was empty. Jungkook's chest tightened. He sat up abruptly, scanning the space. Taehyung's pillow was still there, slightly indented as if he had been lying on it just moments ago. His heart pounded. He swung his legs over the bed and stood, moving toward the door. It wasn't fully closed. He nudged it open further, stepping out. The soft glow of the kitchen light was on. Jungkook hesitated. There, leaning against the counter, was Taehyung. He was awake, arms crossed over his chest, staring at nothing in particular. His hair was slightly messy, lips pressed together, his expression unreadable. Something about the sight made Jungkook's stomach twist. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, voice hoarse from sleep. Taehyung didn't startle. He must have heard Jungkook approaching. "Yeah," he murmured, still not looking at him. "Didn't want to wake you." Jungkook exhaled softly, stepping closer. "I wasn't sleeping well either," Taehyung hummed. Figures. Silence. It was intense, Not like before, but it was thick with things left unsaid. Jungkook's fingers twitched at his sides. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to say, or if he even should say anything at all. Instead, he let his gaze linger on Taehyung, studying him carefully. Taehyung looked tired. Not just physically, emotionally. Like he had spent the entire night trapped in his own thoughts, just like Jungkook had. "Do you regret it?" Jungkook asked before he could stop himself. Taehyung finally turned to look at him, brow furrowed slightly. "Regret what?" Jungkook swallowed. "This. Us. Letting me stay. Letting me. Last night," he said instead. Taehyung studied him for a long moment. Then, quietly, almost too quiet, he answered, "No." Jungkook's breath caught. Taehyung looked away again, exhaling. "But that doesn't mean I know what comes next." Jungkook nodded, his throat tight. "I don't either." Another silence. But this time, it felt different. Like they were standing at the edge of something new, something uncertain, something fragile. And for once, neither of them was running from it. Taehyung let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "We're a mess." Jungkook let out a breathy laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah." "The biggest?" Taehyung's lips curled slightly. It wasn't a full smile, but it was enough. Jungkook took a small step closer, hesitant. "Do you want me to go back to bed?" Taehyung eyed him. "Only if you want to." Jungkook hesitated. Then, slowly, cautiously, he pulled out one of the chairs at the small kitchen table and sat down instead. Taehyung didn't tell him to leave. And Jungkook didn't move. They sat there, two people still figuring out how to navigate the space between them. But at least, for now, they weren't doing it alone. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt like a tentative truce, one neither of them dared to break. Jungkook sat at the kitchen table, his fingers drumming lightly against the wooden surface. Taehyung remained by the counter, arms crossed, deep in thought. The small kitchen light cast a warm glow over him, highlighting the shadows beneath his eyes. Jungkook wanted to say something, anything, to pull Taehyung out of his head, but he didn't know how. So he settled for the only thing that felt natural. "You look exhausted," he murmured. Taehyung blinked, as if just realizing Jungkook was still watching him. Then, with a sigh, he pushed himself away from the counter and finally sat down across from him. "I am," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But I don't think sleep would help." Jungkook frowned. "Nightmares?" Taehyung hesitated. Then he shook his head. "No. Just overthinking." Jungkook understood that feeling all too well. A part of him wanted to ask what Taehyung had been thinking about, but he wasn't sure if he was ready to hear the answer. So instead, he reached across the table, fingers brushing lightly against Taehyung's wrist. Taehyung stiffened at the contact, but he didn't pull away. Jungkook let his touch linger for just a moment longer before retreating, pretending he hadn't noticed the way Taehyung's breathing had hitched. "I don't know how to stop overthinking either," Jungkook admitted. "But I know that it doesn't always help." Taehyung let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "Since when did you get so wise?" Jungkook smiled faintly. "Since I realized that avoiding things doesn't make them disappear." Taehyung's gaze softened. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, in a voice so quiet Jungkook almost missed it, Taehyung murmured, "I don't know how to do this, Jungkook." Jungkook's heart clenched. this?" he asked, his throat dry. Taehyung swallowed, looking down at his hands. "You. Us. Letting you in again." His fingers curled into a loose fist. "I keep thinking that maybe it's better if I don't." Jungkook held his breath, waiting. Then, Taehyung's lips parted again, and he whispered, "But I don't think I can stop myself either." Jungkook's chest tightened painfully. That was the closest thing to hope Taehyung had given him. And it was enough. Jungkook leaned forward slightly, searching Taehyung's gaze. "Then don't." Taehyung inhaled sharply. "It's not that simple." Jungkook nodded. "I know." Another silence. Then, Taehyung sighed and rubbed his temples. "I need time." Jungkook's heart was still pounding, but he nodded. "Take all the time you need." Taehyung glanced up at him, searching his face. "And if I never figure it out?" Jungkook exhaled slowly. "Then I'll wait." Something in Taehyung's expression cracked for just a second, something raw and vulnerable. But before Jungkook could say anything else, Taehyung pushed back his chair and stood up. "I should try to sleep," he muttered. Jungkook nodded, even though he knew Taehyung probably wouldn't get any rest. "Yeah," he said softly. "Good night, Taehyung." Taehyung lingered by the doorway for a brief moment. Then, just as he was about to leave, he hesitated. Without looking back, he murmured, "Good night, Jungkook," and then he was gone. Jungkook sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where Taehyung had been. His chest felt tight. But for the first time in a long while, it wasn't just from pain. It was from hope.